Hey guys, today I'm here to talk to you about slow motion. What you need to know to get epic cinematic results. But like Spider-Man, once you have that great power, you need to use it with great responsibility. So never use slow motion to make somebody look stupid. Damn you, Future Dave, and your editing. Roll test footage. So what are we going to cover? The basics of slow motion, types of slow-mo, the key things you need to understand about frame rate, plus a bunch of cool, creative and cinematic tips. Just before we start, if you enjoy the video, then like, subscribe, and I would love to hear your questions or thoughts in the comments. Plus, recent data suggests that my subscribers are so cool, they don't even look at explosions. So if you want that kind of environmental indifference, then jump on board. Let's start with the basics. Types of slow motion and how to use them. Your options depend on the frame rate of your final project. That is because all slow motion really is capturing more frames per second when you record than the frames per second at which the project will play back. Which means when you match that footage recorded at a higher frame rate to the frame rate of your project, it gets slowed down in the process. We will cover exactly what your options are and how much they slow things down later on. But first, basic settings. Head to menu 2, tab 1. Set file format to XAVC HD. All our slow motion options are in 1080p, but don't worry, just like Terry Crews, even after all these years, it still looks good. Recording setting lets us choose the frame rate that we will record in. The first number is frames per second, so 120p means 120 frames per second. The second number is the bit rate of the file. The higher that second number is, the more quality we will capture in our video. So, just like Robert Downey Jr. in the 90s, higher is always better. For instance, 120p 100M is better than 120p 60M. Back in menu 2, tab 1, and we have HFR settings. This stands for high frame rate rather than horny fat Robert, as I initially feared. It's a relief that guy is not living in my camera anymore. We use HFR mode for ultra slow-mo. I already made a detailed guide, so I'm not going to repeat too much, but there's one key thing I will highlight. Ensure the record setting in HFR mode is the same frame rate that you will use for your final project to avoid extra headaches in the edit. I also recommend setting up custom shortcuts and quick access menus for the main slow-mo settings that you use. Video here will tell you exactly how. So, now you know the basic settings. Nice, but what are our options? What are the different types of slow motion? To answer that, we will need some simple maths, but at least I will give you some nice slow motion footage to look at rather than this grim face while I explain. The ZV1 can shoot some types of slow motion continuously while recording audio. I call that standard slow-mo, and it covers 60 and 120 frames per second. The other type is ultra slow motion for higher frame rates, which you can get with the HFR mode. HFR records short bursts of a couple of seconds and it cannot record audio. The recording frame rate for each option is set out from left to right in the columns of this table, and the amount of slowing down that you achieve for each playback frame rate is set out in the rows. So if you record at 120p and use that in a 24p project, you will get playback 5 times slower than in real life, which is the 5x, or 20% of its original speed. If we use that same 120p footage in a 60p project, then you'd only get playback 2 times slower than reality, or 50% of original speed. That's how this whole table works. You can always pause or come back to this bit if it's helpful. I bet you never thought a table could be so exciting outside of a pro wrestling match. Well, that excitement's not over yet, because now we need to quickly cover how to match frame rates to your project when you slow things down. But don't worry, I'll give you some cool test footage to look at while I explain. The concept here is we want our slow motion frame rate to create a whole number of frames for each frame in our timeline when we play back. This is again easier to explain with some numbers. This table assumes your project is 24p and you are looking to slow down 120p footage. We can see that if we slow down our 120p footage to 20%, it would play back at 24p. 20% of 120 is 24, meaning there is 1 frame of footage for every frame that the timeline moves. That's going to make things look smooth because they match up perfectly. If we slowed that 120p footage to 50%, it means there are 60 frames per second, or 2.5 frames for every 1 frame in the timeline. 60 divided by 24 equals 2.5. This can cause your footage to look more jittery than a cocaine enthusiast after 3 espressos, as the video tries to deal with all of these partial frames. The key thing to understand: when you slow down your footage, work out how many frames per second will be played at that new speed. Divide that number by the project frames per second. Make sure that answer is a whole number, no decimal points, and if it isn't, consider changing the speed of your slow-mo footage until it is. Just like in The Matrix, this is a rule that you can bend or break, so go with whatever you think looks best, but just be aware of the whole number rule. There is no spoon. Now, some cinematic tips. Speed ramps are one of the coolest techniques for spicing up your slow motion. This is when we smoothly move from one playback speed to another, like in this example where we move from 100% to 20% playback speed. The part where we slow down is emphasized, which can draw the audience's attention or make a character or action look cooler. Though no amount of slow motion will make some people look cool. You can get creative and have multiple speed ramps up and slowdowns to give dynamics to a clip, like in this example. Another great thing to combine with slow motion are focus techniques, which can get really cinematic results. Full focus guide, right here. In this example, we use manual focus and camera movement with a speed ramp to slow things down as the subject comes into focus. The next tip is to use slow-mo on simple panning or tilting shots, and like chloroform, it can create a dreamy quality to your scene, like this. Which neatly brings us to another tip: stabilisation. Slow motion smooths out small movements and camera shake, so you can use it to stabilise simple shots, like in these examples. The slower the slow-mo, the more it will smooth out movements. But remember, if you want to speed ramp back to 100%, you'll be right back to the original camera shake. So, if you want to use slow-mo and full speed in the same clip, consider using a gimbal. Lots of info on the Xeon Crane M2 I use with my ZV1, right here. You can also use Catalyst gyroscopic stabilization if you're using 60p slow-mo, full guide to Catalyst right here, but at 120 frames per second and beyond, you lose that option. Next, I need to urge caution around low light, not because of the increased risk of crime or vampires, or the frightening hybrid that I call crime-pyres, but because of light flicker. The ZV1 won't allow a shutter speed lower than your frame rate once you're at 120p or higher. So at 120p, your shutter must be 1/125 or higher. If you're shooting at 480p, it must be 1/500 or higher, and so on. If you are near artificial lights with such high shutter speeds, you may get light flicker, which looks worse than a sexy Nigel Farage calendar. No one wants that. Full explanation of light flicker in my low light video. So try to avoid artificial lights in your slow motion shots, or maybe bring your own portable LED lights. The ones that I currently use are linked in the description. Shutter speed also controls the amount of motion blur in your footage, so keep that in mind if you're shooting something fast moving, like my subscriber count. I lied, that's not particularly fast moving. If only I could think of a hint to encourage more people to subscribe. Lower shutter speed will bake in more motion blur, which will remain even when you slow things down, and that can look unusual. Higher shutter speed will have less motion blur, which can look more natural when the footage is slowed down. The classic rule of setting shutter speed to 1 over double the frame rate is a good place to start, but I recommend you experiment and find whatever you like the look of best. I talk more about shutter speed for ultra slow motion, where it can be a little different in that video. And what about vlogging? It's more socially acceptable than logging or dogging, but can you use slow motion with it? The answer is yes. At 60 or 120 frames per second, the ZV1 still records audio, so you can capture and slow that down too, like in our intro. This means you can vlog normally in real time and then slow down particularly cool moments. A great option if something interesting happens behind you or if you're vlogging some action. All the other rules and concepts we discussed still apply here, so just bear those in mind. And that is it for today. A massive thank you for watching, especially making it all the way to the end. If you enjoyed the video, then like, subscribe, and let me know your thoughts or questions in the comments. And until next time, take it easy.